Hey guys, tonight we step barefoot into the shadows of the medieval world, a world of stone chapels, burning incense, and long silences broken only by whispered prayers and the tolling of distant bells. You find yourself standing in a forest, clearing just after dawn. Mist coils around your ankles. The trees lean in close, as if they're listening. And there, right there, just beyond the tree line, is a young man discarding a pile of rich fabrics, silks, velvets, even a cloak. He's not being robbed. He's not mad. He's free. This is Francis, not Saint Francis yet. Just Francesco, the spoiled son of a wealthy cloth merchant in Assisi, who, quite frankly, could have lived a life of fine wine and silk slippers. Instead, he's talking to the sky and handing everything back to his father, including his clothes. Yep, full surrender. No trust fund, no inheritance, no shoes. You probably won't survive this life. Just saying. Cold winters, angry mobs, possible bear attacks. It's not for everyone. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe it. Only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You watch Francis stumble away from town, barefoot and beaming. The stones slice his feet, but his smile is like someone who's just discovered something bigger than comfort. He sleeps in caves, eats crusts, talks to strangers, and sometimes, while praying in half-ruined chapels, hears voices. Historians still argue whether these voices were mystical, psychological, or a product of prolonged fasting and unfiltered water. But either way, they changed everything. There's one particular moment you're there for it when Francis steps into the half-collapsed church of San Damiano. The roof's leaking, birds have nested in the altar. He kneels, prays, and hears the crucifix speak. Francis, rebuild my church. He blinks. Rebuild. Like with wood, with bricks. He shrugs and starts lugging stones. This is peak Francis. Literal, simple, wildly impractical, but holy in a way that makes even the sternest priests nervous. You follow him through fields, where he preaches to anyone who'll listen. Farmers, merchants, stray cats. It doesn't matter. Francis has no hierarchy. If you breathe, you're worth saving. One afternoon, he meets a leper. The kind of person medieval folks avoided like cursed gold. And Francis, he walks straight up, touches the man's rotting hand, and kisses his face. You gag a little. He smiles wider. Here's your fringe fact of the night. Francis may have hated lepers growing up. Some records suggest he couldn't stand the sight or smell of them. So that kiss, it wasn't just compassion, it was conquest over his own fear. The thing is, he starts collecting followers. At first, it's just a few weirdos, ex-soldiers, failed poets, other barefoot dreamers. But soon it becomes something else, a movement. Francis doesn't want power, but power, like a confused puppy, keeps following him anyway. He tells his brothers to beg, own nothing, and never touch money. Which, back then, made you look either like a prophet or an escaped lunatic. And yet, it works. People start to listen. People start to change. You trail Francis to Rome, where he stands before Pope Innocent III. The Pope, and, basically, says, "Hi, can I have permission to start a poor people's club that wanders around barefoot, annoying the wealthy?" The Pope blinks, his advisors scoff. One cardinal may or may not spill wine laughing. But Innocent, legend says, has a dream that night. A crumbling church is being held up by one very small, very dirty man. Guess who? And so, permission is granted. Sort of. More like a don't cause too much trouble nod. But that's all Francis needs. Now, you're walking with him through the hills of Umbria, listening to him hum psalms while birds land on his shoulders. Literal birds. Not a metaphor. They seem to know something about him that humans forget. Francis sleeps in fields, bathes in streams, writes little poems to the sun and the moon and the wind. You'd roll your eyes, but it's weirdly moving, like watching someone remember how to be human in a world addicted to noise. A mainstream historical fact for your pillow tonight. Francis's Canticle of the Sun is one of the earliest known pieces of literature written in the Italian vernacular. Not Latin, that means he spoke to people in their own language. Language radical for a time when holiness usually wore a Latin disguise. Francis becomes famous, against his will. People start carving little statues of him. Kings want blessings. Noble ladies swoon at his poverty. And Francis, he grows, quiet. The more the world praises him, the more he seems to disappear into silence. One evening, you find him kneeling on a mountainside. The sun bleeds red behind him, his hands tremble. He's praying with such intensity, it feels like the rocks themselves might cry out. And that's when it happens, he receives the stigmata. Wounds in his hands, feet, and side that mirror the crucified Christ. No blade touched him, no fire, no lash, just pain, deep, divine, and wordless. You can't explain it. Scholars can't agree on it. But there it is, Francis, glowing with joy and bleeding quietly in the twilight. You stay with him until nightfall. The forest hushes, the stars blink on, and Francis, still smiling, leans his head against a stone and falls asleep. Tomorrow, the journey continues. But for now, the leaves rustle gently above, and the breath of the saints whispers in the trees. Morning creeps in quietly, like it's trying not to wake anyone. The sky glows pink behind the hills of Assisi, and you're already walking because Francis never stops. There's no lazy coffee ritual, no stretch and scroll. He wakes with a prayer on his lips and dust on his feet, and today, he's heading somewhere no sane person wants to go, the leper colony. You'd rather turn back, your stomach's already knotting, and the idea of open sores, missing noses, and that thick, sweet rot in the air makes you hesitate. But Francis, he's humming. He carries no food, no money, no map. Just a sense of direction that somehow always leads to suffering and the strange peace that hides there. You follow him down a dirt path, lined with thorn bushes and the occasional startled rabbit. Ahead, the leper house rises like a sad fortress, built more to keep people in than to keep anything out. When the first leper limps out, you instinctively pull back. Half his face is gone. His hands are wrapped in so many layers of cloth it's like his fingers have been erased. But Francis kneels before him. No hesitation, no flinch, just love. He doesn't just give food or coin. He embraces, talks, washes their feet. These are people who've been spat on, abandoned, even feared, as contagious curses. But Francis treats them like royalty, jokes with them, even sings. You start to realize, Francis isn't brave because he's fearless. He's brave because he goes anyway. Fear is just another thorn in the path, and he's too busy loving to stop and pluck it out. Historians still argue whether Francis was ever truly ordained in a traditional priestly sense. He resisted titles and authority like a cat avoids bathwater. Even when people tried to call him Father Francis, he preferred brother. He wanted no man to feel smaller next to him. And that leads you to one of the more uncomfortable episodes. And the church hierarchy. Spoiler alert, it's tense. You're with him one afternoon, as he stands before a panel of stiff-robed bishops. They're not thrilled. His followers are growing in number, running wild through cities, chanting about poverty and poking at rich people's consciences. Worse, they're doing it with joy. Francis stands barefoot, eyes lowered, and begins to speak. He tells them about Christ really, tells them about how Jesus didn't own a home, didn't charge for miracles, didn't wear gold rings or demand soft robes. It's not exactly what the bishops want to hear. One whispers, he's naive. Another mutters, he's dangerous. But one, just one, looks thoughtful. You're not sure what wins them over. Maybe it's his sincerity. Maybe it's the Holy Spirit. Or maybe they're just too stunned by his complete lack of self-preservation. But eventually, they allow the Order of Friars Minor to exist under church blessing. Technically. With caveats, Francis doesn't care. He's already headed back into the streets. You tag along as he weaves through marketplaces, preaching next to fishmongers and boot polishers. He's got no pulpit, just a voice, and it's not loud either. Not fire and brimstone booming, it's soft, honest, like a friend who's finally decided to tell you the truth. Mainstream. Historical note for your mental bookmark. Francis's approach to preaching was revolutionary. While most sermons of the era were laced with Latin, legalism, and a touch of terror, Francis made it simple. Love God, love others, own less, forgive more. And then he does something unexpected. He starts visiting sultans, yes, actual Muslim leaders during the Crusades. You're half expecting a beheading. But Francis walks into enemy territory unarmed, unguarded, and probably unbathed. And somehow ends up having a respectful theological debate with Sultan Al-Kamil in Egypt. He may or may not have been involved. It's fringe, it's bold, and it's utterly bonkers that no one slits his throat. But instead, they part as friends. No one converts, but no one dies either. Which, frankly, in the Middle Ages, counts as a win. And just when you think he's done shocking the world, he writes a set of rules. A rule of life for his growing order, outlining things like humility, simplicity, and obedience. It's not legally binding, not backed by armies or wealth. Just words, but somehow, it holds. Like a fragile vine climbing the stones of history. One night, around a crackling campfire, a young friar asks Francis why he's always so cheerful. Francis pauses, thinks, then says, perfect joy is not found in comfort, or applause, or even in being praised for holiness. Perfect joy is being rejected, misunderstood, and mocked. And rejoicing anyway, because your treasure is in heaven. You blink. That's not how your therapist framed happiness. But it hits different when the guy saying it is sleeping on a rock. Francis's health starts to falter. All those barefoot winters, and fasts, and impromptu bedrolls, in damp caves. They add up. His stomach's a mess. His eyes hurt constantly. He's half blind. And still, he prays, sings, smiles. You begin to understand why people followed him, not because he had charisma, but because he had clarity. He knew who he was, what he wanted, and who he served, and the rest. Noise. The moon rises. The stars above Assisi blink into place like ancient candles, and Francis, worn thin as parchment, whispers to the wind about brother fire and sister water. Tomorrow, he'll speak to birds. But for now, you rest your head against the bark of a cypress tree. And close your eyes. The lepers have gone quiet. The bishops are still confused. And Francis, he's just beginning. Asterisk, the forest is still, as though holding its breath. Somewhere nearby, a fox slips between bushes. You stir, and beside you, Francis is already awake. He's kneeling again, whispering praises to brother sun. Smiling at nothing in particular, just the soft light, slanting through the trees. You follow him into a small meadow, where a miracle is about to happen. Not the flashy, thunder from heaven kind. This one's feathered. A flock of birds gathers as Francis begins to speak. Not just pigeons or crows, there are doves, sparrows, even a curious hawk that perches nearby as if waiting for a sermon. And, yes, he talks to them. Not like a Disney princess, like a brother. He thanks them for praising God, simply by being what they are, flying, chirping, building nests, no ego, no war, no taxes. It's easy to roll your eyes, until the birds don't fly away, they stay still. Listening historians still argue whether this actually happened, or if it's a poetic flourish, added by his followers. But records from early Franciscan sources insist that this wasn't a one-time event. Birds routinely gathered around him, calm and attentive. You glance around. The birds haven't moved. Francis isn't trying to impress anyone. He's just connected, tuned in to something bigger, deeper, truer. And the animals seem to recognize it in a way people rarely do. As he walks away, they follow for a few paces. Wings fluttering like applause. Francis's relationship with nature wasn't just aesthetic, it was theological. He believed every creature, every stone, every breeze, was part of the same sacred choir, not background. Not props, family. One of his most iconic teachings, tucked into the Canticle of the Creatures, refers to even death as Sister Death. It's not dark, it's not grim, it's acceptance with reverence. The way you might speak of an old friend, who's always been honest, even when her timing's terrible, but not everyone's humming along. As Francis's order grows, cracks appear. Some friars want better organization, some want softer beds. Some start getting chummy with bishops and nobles. You watch Francis try to hold it together with gentle hands and a painfully soft voice. But there's tension. He starts to withdraw. More often, not out of bitterness, more like a tree pulling sap inward before winter. One day, he climbs Mount Laverna, a rocky cliffside cloaked in fog and silence. It's a pilgrimage, yes, but also a retreat from the noise his own success created. You trudge up with him. The air thins. Pines whisper overhead. The path narrows until it's just you, Francis, and 1,000 feet of empty space on either side. At the summit, he builds a small shelter. Sleeps on the floor, eats almost nothing, prays until dawn, and then it happens again. Another encounter. This time, no voice, just light, a seraph, some say. A six-winged angel bearing the image of the crucified Christ. It appears in a blaze of love and pain, hovering over the cliffs. Francis watches, weeping. And then the wounds appear on his hands, his feet, his side, the stigmata. Mainstream fact check. This is the first recorded case in Christian history of someone bearing the physical wounds of Christ spontaneously. It stuns his companions. It confuses the church. And it's entirely unverifiable by modern standards. Which, naturally, only deepens the mystery. Francis hides them at first, covering his hands with cloth, walking carefully to ease the pain in his feet. But they bleed, and ache. And remind him constantly that the imitation of Christ isn't poetic, it's bloody. You sit with him beneath a tree, the sky bruised with approaching storm clouds. He tells you he doesn't want to be remembered as a saint, just as a poor man who tried to love. And here's a strange tidbit. Francis was terrified of mice. Actual fear. He once reportedly fled a cell because of one. So there you have it, stigmatized by angels, but still spooked by rodents. The days grow shorter. His health declines. One evening, he asks to be carried back to Assisi. Not to a palace or monastery, but to the little Portiuncular chapel, the same crumbly place where he first heard God's voice tell him to rebuild the church. He wants to die on the bare ground, as he's lowered onto the earth. The light catches the hollows of his cheeks. He's smiling again. And then he begins to sing. His brothers join in, voices wavering. It's the canticle again, praising fire, water, wind, even Sister Death. There's no fear in his voice, only joy. The joy of a man who gave everything, lost nothing, and somehow changed the world. Francis dies quietly, no storm, no trumpet, just birds chirping in the trees, and a handful of weeping friars, kneeling in the dust. Later, some will build churches in his name. Others will write books, argue over relics, debate miracles, but none of them will walk quite like he did barefoot, eyes open, smiling at the sky. The meadow is empty now, but you can still hear the birds. You wake with dew on your skin and a chill in your bones. The world smells like pine needles and early morning. But the scene has changed. You're no longer on a hillside near Assisi. The year has turned forward, and the forest has shifted deeper. Now, more mysterious, with vines that hang like heavy curtains. Somewhere nearby, a bell tolls. You walk toward the sound, and stumble upon a cloistered world, part abbey, part apothecary, part concert hall. It's the 12th century, and you're now in the company of someone who is, frankly, impossible to categorize. Meet Hildegard of Bingen. Hildegard is already working, of course. She doesn't really do rest. You find her in a garden, hands deep in a mixture of sage and mugwort, muttering about balance and bile and the divine humors. If Francis was a barefoot mystic who hugged lepers, Hildegard is a thunderstorm wearing a wimple. She stands taller than you expect. Her eyes are sharp, but not unkind. Her voice, clear as glass, and twice as cutting when she's frustrated. She's a Benedictine abbess, a visionary mystic, a composer of celestial music, a writer, a physician, and let's not forget, a woman somehow schooling bishops and emperors without getting burned at the stake. Miraculous, really. Historians still argue whether she should be remembered primarily as a theologian or as a proto-scientist. But the truth is, Hildegard defies simple labels. You follow her inside the abbey, where parchments are drying on wooden racks and ink smells like iron and vinegar. She's just finished writing Sevi's record of her divine visions, complete with cosmic diagrams, prophetic utterances, and poetic language that would make a modern philosopher need a nap. These visions, which began when she was just a child, come with physical force. Light explodes behind her eyes. Voices hum from nowhere. No one knows exactly why she experiences them, only that she does, and records them with terrifying clarity. Skeptical, so were her contemporaries until she silenced them by getting papal approval from none other than Pope Eugenius III. Try arguing with that. You sit beside her while she composes music. Not Gregorian chants, something stranger, sweeter, almost alien. She calls them Symphonia, Harmonia, Celestium, Revelationum, or the Symphony of the Harmony of Celestial Revelations. The names are long, but the melodies drift like incense through the corridors. Weightless and haunting. And here's your quirky tidbit. Hildegard invented her own constructed language, called lingua ignota, the unknown language. No one fully understands its purpose, but she used it in her spiritual writings, pairing it with an alphabet she also designed. A secret code for the sacred. A poetic flourish. Historians are still scratching their heads. But don't let the heavenly notes and glowing visions fall. Hildegard was fierce. When the clergy in Mainz refused to bury a man on consecrated ground, she rebuked them so hard their ears practically fell off. She wrote letters to emperors, popes, and nobles, telling them off for corruption, pride, and apathy like she had divine HR clearance. You get the sense that had she been born in any other era war, perhaps in a male body, she'd have run entire countries. Instead, she ran ideas across language, medicine, music, theology, and ecology. As you help her collect rose petals for herbal salves, she explains that everything in creation is connected, what she calls viriditas, the greening power of life. It's the divine spark in herbs, in trees, in you. The energy that heals and renews. She teaches the nuns about balance, in food, in thought, in spirit. Modern wellness influencers would faint from how ahead of the curve she is. She advocates for moderation in all things, warns against spiritual laziness, and here's a surprise: thinks fasting too much is bad for your soul. Imagine that. A medieval nun telling you to eat more, as the evening light pours through stained glass, turning everything golden violet. She takes you to the scriptorium. There's a scroll in front of her. She's writing a letter to another bishop, of course, because someone has displeased God again. You notice the fatigue in her hands. Her health has never been robust. For decades, she's battled migraines, stomach pain, and physical exhaustion. And yet, her pen never stops. When people question her visions, she reminds them that it's not pride if the voice comes from heaven. Historians still debate the nature of her illness. Some suggest she suffered from epilepsy. Others believe it was chronic migraines, paired with intense visual auras. But no diagnosis quite explains the fire in her spirit, or the clarity of her words. As night settles over the abbey, the nuns begin to sing. Their voices carry the music she composed, high, pure. You lie back in the stone cloister, the music spiraling upward, like smoke from a candle. The stars blink into being above the old walls, and for a moment, the world seems to tilt, not off balance, but in harmony. You feel the viriditas Hildegard spoke of, not just in the leaves or herbs but in you. That quiet, humming aliveness. But the vision doesn't linger. The shadows shift again, and you're pulled down a winding path, past candlelit cells and cold monastery corridors, into a different kind of devotion. The year is now 1113, and you're about to meet a man who doesn't speak to birds or invent languages, but who can bend kings with words sharper than swords. You step into the chill of Clairvaux, a Cistercian monastery etched out of the forest. Like a scar, the monks move like whispers, heads bowed, robes brushing the ground. This is Saint Bernard of Clairvaux territory, and you're on sacred, if slightly intimidating ground. Bernard doesn't greet you with a smile. He rarely does. He looks like he's been fasting for a week and probably has. Tall and thin, with eyes like flint and a voice like thunder under glass. He's intense, even by medieval monk standards. The kind of man who wouldn't flinch if a fire broke out mid-prayer. He joined the Cistercians when he was just in his early 20s. But he didn't show up alone. He brought 30 men with him, brothers, cousins, friends, all convinced to abandon their wealth and titles and become monks. Yes, 30. If Francis attracted birds, Bernard apparently magnetized entire families. Historians still argue whether Bernard was a spiritual genius or a master manipulator. Either way, his influence was immediate and total. Within a few years, Clairvaux became the model monastery, strict, silent, and spiritually magnetic. You try walking beside him, but Bernard moves like a man always late for a divine appointment. He speaks in clipped phrases, often quoting scripture from memory, usually in Latin. He expects you to keep up. He doesn't tolerate laziness, or pride, or music that's too elaborate. Gregorian chant is fine, but anything showy gets side-eyed hard. And yet his sermons, electrifying, his writings, volcanic. He preaches with such force that people weep, faint, and sometimes abandon their lives on the spot to join monasteries. At the Council of Troyes, it's Bernard who's asked to write the rule for a rising military order, the Knights Templar. Yes, those Templars, monk warriors, with swords and white mantles. It's a strange pairing, but Bernard makes it make sense. Fight sin like a soldier. and protect pilgrims on the road to the Holy Land. Your quirky tidbit. Bernard once challenged Abelard, a philosopher and theologian, in a very public intellectual throwdown. Abelard believed reason could explain faith. Bernard, not so much. The result? A theological street fight, one that still gets referenced in academic footnotes today. The tension between faith and reason, heart and head, plays out in every corridor of Clairvaux. Bernard walks both paths, but always with one foot firmly. In Mystery, he talks about the love of God, like a man utterly consumed. His writing on the Song of Songs, that steamy Old Testament book, isn't shy. He turns its sensual metaphors into ecstatic divine longing. At times, it sounds more like love poetry than theology. And that's Bernard's gift: intensity. Not warmth, not sweetness. Just burning clarity. You watch as he collapses into prayer, sometimes for hours, face pressed to the cold stone. His health suffers, his body fails, but his will, like granite. Yet even Bernard has moments of hesitation. The Second Crusade looms. People are skeptical. Morale is low. Enter Bernard, stage left, roaring across France and Germany with sermons so powerful, they convince thousands to take up the cross. It's a triumph, until it's not. The crusade fails. Spectacularly. Mismanagement, lack of discipline, and questionable leadership doom it from the start. When the survivors return, eyes hollow and faith shaken, they look to Bernard for answers. He's devastated. Historians still debate how much blame Bernard truly deserves. Was he naive, misled, overconfident? Whatever the case, he writes a letter dripping with sorrow, confessing that God's will is mysterious, and sometimes beyond even his understanding. It's his most human moment, and maybe his most saintly. You walk with him one last time through the cloisters of Clairvaux. The night air bites. The stars overhead look the same as they did in Hildegard's sky, in Francis's sky. Bernard stops, gazes upward, and just for a heartbeat you see the boy beneath the monk. The one who once left everything behind to chase the silence of God. He died in 1153, worn thin by a life of fire. When they carried his body away, the monks wept not just because they'd lost a leader, but because they'd lost the one who taught them how to long for heaven with every breath. You're still in the cloister, still in the silence, but the story is only beginning. You stay very still, letting the stone beneath you hold your weight, letting the silence of Clairvaux soak into your bones. But then slowly, like ink spreading through parchment, the air changes, the candlelight flickers, the world hums beneath your feet. Time has turned once again. You're in a village now, one tucked between moors and hills in 13th century England. The wind here carries the scent of heather and rain, and the streets are little more than packed mud. Chickens scatter underfoot. But you're not here for the livestock. You're here for a woman most people never saw after her 30th birthday. A woman who lived her entire life in a room smaller than your average pantry. Her name is Julian of Norwich, and she's unlike anyone you've met so far. She doesn't walk through forests like Francis, or write operatic theology like Hildegard, or command kings like Bernard. Instead, she chooses to disappear physically anyway into a single stone cell, attached to the wall of a church. A place where she will stay for the rest of her life. She's an anchoress, which sounds like a pirate rank, but is actually more intense than any vow of silence or fasting you've heard of. Once you enter your anchor hold, this little bricked-in room you never leave, ever. And before you judge, remember, she chose this. But let's rewind a bit. Julian isn't born Julian. That's the name of the church where she anchors herself, St. Julian's, in Norwich. We don't even know her birth name. She lives through the Black Death, which killed nearly half of England. Then, while lying on what everyone thought was her deathbed at the age of 30, she experiences a series of vivid, astonishing visions of Christ, what she later calls her showings. And here's your historical fact. Julian's Revelations of Divine Love is the first book in English known to be written by a woman. That's right, first ever. Her visions are intimate and strange. She sees Christ suffering, but also smiling, bleeding, but also radiant. In one vision, he shows her a small round object in his palm. She asks what it is. It is all that is made. He tells her, all of creation, everything reduced to something the size of a hazelnut. Small, fragile, but held together by love. That's Julian's theology in a nutshell. Literally, her most famous line. All shall be well, and all shall be well, and all manner of things shall be well. And that, friend, is where the quirky part comes in, because this line, so simple, so calm, was written during a time of absolute horror. Plagues, revolts, political chaos. Imagine tweeting everything's fine while watching your neighbors drop dead. That's the spiritual steel of Julian. Historians still argue whether Julian's optimism was madness or mysticism. How could she believe in God's love while surrounded by so much death? Was it denial, divine insight, or something deeper on? Inner strength, honed in silence. You sit with her now, in that small room, lit only by a single candle. Through a little slit in the wall, she receives food and gives spiritual counsel to townspeople who visit. They come with grief, guilt, fears. Leave with hope. She listens more than she speaks. Her voice, when it comes, is soft, but unshakable. You ask her how she knows everything will be well. She just smiles. Because I have seen love. Her God is not angry, not vengeful, not lurking behind the clouds with lightning bolts. Her God bleeds with us, aches with us, waits with us. A mothering God, a sheltering God. And this is where Julian breaks the mold. In an age of damnation sermons and wrathful judgment, she speaks only of divine compassion. No fire and brimstone, just light in the darkness. She believes even sin has a purpose, not to damn us, but to teach us grace. And that's where things get a little controversial. More than one theologian clutches their robes at the idea of purposeful sin. But Julian isn't worried. She's not interested in academic debates. Her words are not sharpened like Bernard's. They're wrapped in velvet. And yet, somehow, they cut deeper. The anchor hold is small, but her thoughts are vast. She writes about the Trinity, the soul, the incarnation. She compares Christ to a mother who carries, feeds, and nurtures us. It's radical, it's beautiful. And it's coming from a woman who hasn't seen the outside world in decades. You glance at the slit in the wall. Someone has left her food. She picks at it absently, more concerned with eternity than bread. She sees the divine in the ordinary, that loaf, in the candle wax, in your anxious heartbeat, as you prepare to leave. She leans closer. You won't always feel it, she says, but love is never absent. Not ever. You want to stay longer. There's something soothing about her presence. Something that says you don't have to fix everything. You just have to be present. To love. To let yourself be loved. You back away from the cell slowly, the candlelight dimming behind the narrow slit. Her voice follows you into the night, soft as linen. All shall be well, and you believe it. Asterisk, you blink, and Norwich fades like mist at sunrise. The hush of Julian's anchor hold gives way to something more immediate, more chaotic. Hooves pounding on dirt roads, swords clanging in the distance. Shouts echoing from stone walls. You've landed in 13th century France, and the air tastes of iron and smoke. It's not a battlefield yet, but it could be, at any moment. This is a time of tension, of shifting powers and crusades that don't always point toward Jerusalem. And in the thick of it all, stands a man cloaked, not in armor, but in humility. Saint Dominic, founder of the Dominican order. You find him walking through a village. Robes dusty, sandals worn to near oblivion. He travels light, no horse, no procession, just books tucked under one arm, and a face lined with exhaustion. You follow, trying to keep up. He's already spoken in 3 towns this week. He'll preach in another by nightfall. Dominic isn't flashy. He's not the kind of saint who levitates, or glows, or flings open the sky. No, he believes in something quieter, but more dangerous to ignorance. Words. Logical, measured, persuasive words. And make no mistake, he's on a mission. Your mainstream fact. Dominic was born in Spain, around 1170, and founded the Order of Preachers, also known as the Dominicans. His goal: combat the rising tide of heresy, specifically the Cathars in southern France, whose dualistic beliefs clashed with traditional Christian doctrine. You glance around nervously. The Cathars are well liked in some regions known for their austerity, their refusal to swear oaths, their vegetarianism. They believe in a strict dualism, that the material world is evil, and only the spiritual realm is good. It sounds poetic, but to Dominic, it's dangerously wrong. To him, creation isn't something to be escaped, something to be redeemed. But here's your quirky tidbit. When the church first sent envoys to challenge the Cathars, they arrived with gold rings and pompous speeches. Guess how that went? Yep. Disaster. Dominic tried something different. He stripped himself of luxury, traveled on foot, lived in poverty, just like his opponents. He even debated Cathar leaders face to face, armed only with scripture and relentless patience. And people listened. Historians still argue whether Dominic's mission helped avert a full-blown civil war, only postponed one. Because eventually, the debates gave way to swords. The Albigensian Crusade unleashed bloodshed across southern France. Cities were razed, thousands killed, and Dominic, he kept preaching, haunted, some say, by what he couldn't stop. You see him now, in a monastery, sitting cross-legged with a group of young friars. He teaches them how to argue, how to listen, how to live simply but think deeply. The Dominican motto is Veritas, truth, but this isn't truth, shouted from a pulpit. It's truth whispered across dinner tables, stitched into parchment, passed between minds like bread. He believed study was holy, that a well-formed mind was a weapon against despair. It's why the Dominicans later flood the universities of Europe, Paris, Bologna, Oxford. If you've ever endured a theology class that made your brain melt, you can probably thank a Dominican. You smile as Dominic pauses mid-sentence and corrects a friar's pronunciation of a Latin verb. He's kind about it, but firm. Words matter. Meaning matters. But even he has his breaking points. You follow him one night when he wanders outside. Eyes red from lack of sleep. He prays under the stars until dawn. Not politely, loudly, desperately, begging for souls. He once reportedly said he couldn't bear to study or sleep while people were being lost. That's the fire that keeps him moving. And yet, for all his seriousness, there's a soft edge to him. He laughs easily with children. He cries with the sick. And when he finally dies, in 1221, his last request is simple: bury me under the feet of my brothers. No shrine, no marble, just dust and devotion. Dominic fades into shadow now, replaced by the flicker of candlelight on vellum. The friars he trained keep copying texts, keep preaching, keep asking dangerous questions. They don't always get it right. Some will chase heresy a little too eagerly in the centuries to come. But at the root of it all is Dominic's conviction that truth, when spoken in love, changes everything. You look around the cloister one last time. The silence feels full, not empty. Books rustle, minds stir. And somewhere, beneath the stars, a voice still echoes. Go and preach. You step back from the monastery cloister and feel the centuries press against your shoulders like an old wool cloak. The dust of parchment and echo of friars' footsteps still lingers. But now the earth seems heavier, grittier, more ... Northern. Welcome to 13th century Germany, where the skies hang grey more often than not, and the church bells toll with both warning and wonder. You've arrived just in time to witness the rise of another fierce, flame-hearted soul, one who wrote as boldly as she lived. Say hello to Mechthild of Magdeburg, mystic, poet, and persistent spiritual troublemaker. You spot her on the edge of a meadow, robes fluttering like wings in the wind, talking aloud to God as though he's a slightly exasperated roommate. Mechthild isn't quiet about her visions. She doesn't lock herself away in a cell or filter her experiences through tidy metaphors. Nope, she goes full-on poetic fireworks. Let's start with your mainstream fact. Mechthild was a begging part of a lay religious movement for women that offered a middle ground between nunhood and regular life. Beguines didn't take permanent vows and weren't cloistered. They lived communally, served the poor, and pursued spirituality outside traditional structures. Which, brace yourself, didn't always sit well with the church. Mechthild's visions began in her 20s. She felt called to write them down, and the result was her famous book, The Flowing Light of the Godhead. That title alone tells you everything. This is a woman who doesn't do dry theology. She writes in German Middle, Low German, to be exact, so regular folks can understand. Her, unheard of at the time, and now, for your quirky tidbit. Mechthild's descriptions of her mystical encounters are so vivid, so passionately metaphorical, that later editors often sanitized them. One scholar called her work spiritually erotic. In one vision, her soul literally embraces the divine in a glowing dance of love and longing that feels like someone crossed a prayer with a love song. She writes, God caresses the soul like a mother rocking her child. He kisses her with the mouth of his sweetness. Yeah, try slipping that into a medieval Sunday sermon. But Mechthild isn't interested in pleasing clergy. She's interested in truth, even if that truth is wrapped in fire and honey. She criticizes corrupt priests, scoffs at empty rituals, and warns against spiritual laziness. She once wrote, "What God writes in the book of life cannot be erased by any priest." Yikes. Historians still argue whether Mechthild's boldness got her silenced or protected. At one point, fearing backlash or maybe divine irony, enters a convent run by nuns, who are also mystics, the Sisters of Helfta. There, she finishes her writings under the watchful but supportive eyes of fellow visionaries. And that's where you find her now, older, perhaps a bit quieter, but no less radiant. She's in the scriptorium, parchment spread before her, scratching outlines with a trembling hand and a gleam in her eye. You sit nearby, watching the candle flicker over her words. She smiles without looking up. You've come far, she says. You've seen Francis dance with the sun. You've wept with Julian behind her stone wall. Now you must learn to burn without being consumed. You nod, unsure whether she means metaphorically or literally. She dips her quill and keeps writing. You lean over and catch a glimpse of the sentence forming on the page. The soul who loves God flies, runs, and rejoices. She is free and cannot be bound. You ask her if she's afraid of the church silencing her. Her eyes spark. I'm not here to be safe, she whispers. I'm here to speak. You sit with that for a moment. The meadow wind tugs gently at the shutters. Somewhere, a bell rings. You realize she's shown you something different tonight. Not just how to be holy, but how to be honest, wildly and unapologetically. The world around her may be rigid, rule-bound, hierarchical but Mechthild dances through it, like a flame. Through dry grass, she laughs, soft and sudden. Like a secret too big to hold. You don't ask what the joke is, you just laugh with her. Asterisk, the wind of the meadow fades behind you, and Mechthild's laughter becomes a memory tucked somewhere deep inside your chest. You blink once, maybe twice, and when your eyes open again, the world has shifted. Now you're in Italy, and the streets shimmer with candlelight. It's the early 14th century, and there's tension in the air between popes and emperors, between spiritual hunger and ecclesiastical pomp, between the glitter of cathedrals and the barefoot echoes of wandering preachers. You hear footsteps behind you. Soft, but purposeful. Sandals slapping gently against the flagstones. You turn and see a woman in a worn tunic, her face half shadowed by her veil. She walks quickly, even urgently. You're about to meet Catherine of Siena, and she does not have time for your hesitation. Born in 1347, the youngest of 25 children, because medieval families apparently never heard of taking a break. Catherine lives through one of the most chaotic periods in church history. The Black Death sweeps across Europe. The papacy is in exile, in a vineyard, and most people assume that young girls are meant to be quiet, pious, and preferably invisible. Catherine is none of those things. Your mainstream historical fact. Catherine of Siena became one of the most influential female figures in the church, and was later declared a Doctor of the Church, a title given to only the most revered theologians, most of whom are men with beards and Latin degrees. Catherine, on the other hand, taught herself to read and dictated her letters and prayers to scribes because she never formally studied theology. She claims that, at age 21, she experienced a mystical marriage to Christ, a vision so powerful it redirected her entire life. No veil, no vows in a convent. She lives at home and joins the Third Order of Saint Dominic, wearing their habit, but roaming freely, and roam she does. Your quirky tidbit: Catherine wrote over 400 letters in her lifetime to popes, monarchs, prisoners, merchants, and soldiers, often peppering them with phrases like, "Man up," or "Get off your donkey and fix it." Okay, paraphrased, but you get the idea. She wasn't subtle. She once told the Pope himself to be a man, and returned to Rome, advice he eventually took. But she wasn't just a pen warrior. She cared for the sick during plagues, visited prisoners, and literally dragged herself into the political messes of the day. She believed that spiritual renewal started with facing the rot in your own soul, and then doing something about it. Historians still argue whether Catherine was a radical reformer, or an overly zealous mystic with dangerous political influence. After all, she supported the Pope, returning to Rome, but also meddled in feuding Italian city-states, often at personal risk. She even offered herself in exchange for a condemned prisoner once, though the officials said no thanks, and executed the man anyway. You find her now in a modest room above a bakery. She's dictating a letter while kneeling, eyes closed, brow furrowed. Her voice is urgent, rhythmic. Her words are part prayer, part prophecy, part nonsense coaching session. You can feel the heat rising in the room, not physical heat, but that of conviction. When Catherine speaks, even the dust listens. A scribe dips his pen and asks her to repeat a line. She opens her eyes, and for a moment, you glimpse something almost volcanic behind them. Fire tempered by mercy. Tell him, she says, to put aside self. Tell him that truth cannot be killed. And now, the room goes still. You ask her what drives her, what keeps her from collapsing beneath the weight of it all. She replies simply, love. Not the cushy kind. Not romance or sweet poems. But the kind that binds wounds, lifts corpses, and stands between kings and injustice. The kind that burns your lungs and stiffens your spine. God is not a polite flame, she says. He is a wildfire that consumes the soul and leaves it more alive than before. That's the Catherine you've come to know, not soft, but sacred. Not gentle, but just. Not lofty, but utterly grounded in the grit of real life. She died at 33. Barely more than a whisper of years, but what a sound she made. You step out into the alley where she once walked. The air thick with oven smoke and starlight. Behind you, her voice still rings in your ears. Start with love. End with truth. Do not sleep through the world's sorrow. You nod to no one in particular, and continue down the path she blazed. The smoke of Italian ovens fades as you move forward, the cobblestones beneath your feet shifting with the years. Now, you find yourself in the rugged hills of France again, but this time it's the early 12th century. The air is cool and crisp. A faint scent of pine and damp earth filling your lungs. You hear the soft murmur of a choir, echoing through stone walls, and the steady rhythm of monks chanting their prayers in unison. The abbey looms before you, its massive walls and flying buttresses hinting at something monumental. Here lives Saint Bernard of Clairvaux, a man whose words would shake kingdoms and whose devotion would ignite the heart of Christendom. Bernard is a force of nature, a towering figure, both physically and spiritually. You watch as he strides into the refectory, his presence commanding silence without a single raised voice. Your mainstream historical fact: Bernard was a primary figure in founding the Cistercian order, a reform movement aiming to return monasticism to its strict, austere roots, emphasizing manual labor, simplicity, and intense prayer. Unlike some monks, content with comfort, Bernard's vision was rigorous. He believed holiness came not from ease, but from struggle. The path to God is narrow and sharp, he'd say, and he meant it. Here's your quirky tidbit. Bernard reportedly loved hunting, not the bloodthirsty kind, but bird hunting, which some of his contemporaries found a little ironic for a man devoted to asceticism. Maybe a rare moment where even saints enjoyed a little earthly sport. Historians still argue whether Bernard's charisma paved the way for peace or fueled crusades. He preached the Second Crusade, rallying Europe to take back the Holy Land, but the campaign ended disastrously, staining his legacy with blood and failure. You see Bernard, now in the abbey's cloister, seated beneath the long shadows of ancient trees. His face is serene but intense as he reads scripture aloud, his voice resonating like a deep river flowing through stillness. He's also a prolific writer. His letters, sermons, and prayers shaped medieval spirituality for centuries. One of his favorite themes, the love of God as a burning fire that purifies and consumes. Love is all we need, he declares, for love is God himself. But Bernard is not content to stay cloistered. He journeys often, advising popes, kings, and nobles. When the church falters or moral decay spreads, Bernard's voice booms like thunder. He's both shepherd and storm. You watch as he gently comforts a novice, pressing a hand to the young man's shoulder and speaking softly. Do not fear the narrow path, he says. The harder way leads to the brightest light. Despite his towering reputation, Bernard's humanity shines. He admits moments of doubt and sorrow, wrestling with his own fears beneath the armor of faith. As night falls, you hear the distant call of a bell. Bernard lifts his eyes toward the stars, whispering a prayer for peace, our peace, that seems as elusive as the moonlight dancing on the abbey stones. You walk away, feeling the weight of centuries and the flame of a saint's passion lingering in the chill night air. The chill night air fades behind you, replaced by the soft rustle of olive trees and the warm scent of sun-baked earth. You find yourself in the heart of Assisi, Italy, in the early 13th century, where the streets are alive with the sounds of merchants and the quiet prayers of townsfolk. Here, you meet a man who is less a saint and more a whirlwind of compassion and laughter, Saint Francis of Assisi. You spot him barefoot, his brown habit dusty from travel, sitting among a flock of birds who seem utterly unfazed by his presence. He speaks to them gently, as if they understand every word, his eyes twinkling with a mix of joy and mischief. Your mainstream historical fact. Francis founded the Franciscan order, dedicated to living in poverty and simplicity, preaching to the poor, and embracing the natural world as a mirror of God's love. He rejected his wealthy upbringing and family expectations, choosing instead a life of radical humility. When he kissed a leper, he shocked his friends, but to Francis, seeing Christ in the least of these was natural. Quirky tidbit: Francis is said to have had a special bond with animals. From preaching to birds, to taming a fierce wolf terrorizing the town of Gubbio. The wolf reportedly became a peaceful companion after Francis' intervention, living out its days in harmony with villagers. Historians still argue whether Francis' idealism was sustainable, or if his radical poverty was simply a symbolic gesture. His followers sometimes struggled to maintain the strictness of his vision, leading to tensions within the order. You walk alongside Francis as he journeys through rolling hills, preaching love and peace with a voice both tender and urgent. He laughs easily, cracking jokes that feel centuries ahead of their time, like a medieval stand-up comedian preaching the gospel of grace. At one point, he stops and gently scolds you for walking on a patch of wild flowers, reminding you that even the smallest creature is worthy of respect. His love for creation is palpable, almost contagious. When darkness falls, you find Francis kneeling in prayer under a star-filled sky, the moon casting soft light over his serene face. His prayers are simple, heartfelt, full of awe at God's presence in everything. "You are the mirror," he whispers, reflecting the light of heaven to earth. As you settle near him, you realize that Francis' story is one of transformation, a journey from privilege to poverty, from pride to radical love. His legacy lives not only in stone churches or holy relics, but in the quiet acts of kindness and the courage to live simply in a complicated world. You rise and take a last look at the gentle saint, his laughter lingering in the cool night air as you continue your journey. The warm scent of olive trees fades slowly as you step through the gates of a vast ancient library. The soft flicker of candlelight dances on rows of vellum scrolls and leather-bound manuscripts. You are now in the dim, echoing halls of Rupertsberg Abbey in the 12th century. Nestled in the rolling hills of Germany, here dwells Hildegard of Bingen, a woman whose voice resonates across centuries, not only through her mystical visions, but also through her music, science, and fierce intellect. You watch as Hildegard, a striking figure with fiery eyes, directs a small group of nuns in singing a haunting melody, her voice weaving between the stones like a gentle wind through the forest. Your mainstream historical fact: Hildegard was one of the first known female composers, writing sacred music that broke from traditional chant patterns and displayed an unprecedented range and complexity. But Hildegard's talents don't stop at music. She is also a healer, herbalist, and natural philosopher who writes extensively on medicine, the human body, and the cosmos. Here's your quirky tidbit. Hildegard described visions of dragons and cosmic women in elaborate, sometimes bizarre drawings, images that modern scholars interpret as symbolic representations of spiritual battles and the harmony of creation. Historians still argue whether her visions were divinely inspired or manifestations of neurological conditions. Some suggest migraines or epilepsy, though none can deny her profound influence on medieval spirituality and science. You approach Hildegard as she unrolls a large scroll filled with colorful diagrams, depicting the cycles of the moon and stars. She speaks softly, but with undeniable authority about the interconnectedness of all life. Creation is a living tapestry, she says, woven with threads of light, sound, and spirit. Her teachings challenge the limits of medieval thought. She advises popes and emperors, calls for church reform, and boldly claims that women have a vital role in the divine order. Revolutionary stance in a male-dominated world. As she tends a small garden of medicinal herbs, you notice her gentle hands, steady and sure. She explains how nature holds the key to healing both body and soul. Hildegard's life is a blend of the mystical and the practical, a harmony of visionary experiences and grounded wisdom. She ends her day with a final song, a celestial hymn, that lingers in the air like a soft promise. You leave the abbey with a sense of awe, carrying with you the echoes of a woman who dared to sing her truth loud enough to be heard across the ages. The echo of Hildegard's celestial hymn fades gently as you find yourself walking through a bustling medieval marketplace. The air is thick with the scent of fresh bread, livestock, and the sharp tank of iron from the blacksmith's forge. You are in England, late 12th century, surrounded by the chatter of merchants and the rhythmic clatter of wooden carts. Amid this vibrant chaos stands a man whose life would be etched into history as one of the greatest theologians and scholars of the Middle Ages, Thomas Becket. You watch as Thomas strides purposefully through the crowd, dressed not in royal robes, but in the humble garb of a priest. His eyes gleam with a fiery resolve as he moves toward Canterbury Cathedral, the seat of his archbishopric. Mainstream historical fact: Thomas Becket was appointed Archbishop of Canterbury by King Henry II. But their friendship quickly soured when Becket fiercely defended the Church's rights against royal encroachment, leading to a dramatic power struggle. The clash culminated in Becket's brutal murder in 1170 by knights, believing they were carrying out the king's wishes, a moment that shocked Christendom and made Becket a martyr almost overnight. Here's your quirky tidbit: Becket was rumored to have been quite a character before his ecclesiastical rise, a man who once earned his living as a shrewd royal chancellor, known for his sharp wit and extravagant lifestyle. Talk about a globe. Historians still argue whether Becket was a genuine martyr or a political figure caught in the ruthless game of medieval power dynamics. You follow Thomas into the vast cathedral, where light filters through stained glass in kaleidoscopic bursts, illuminating dust motes swirling in the air. He kneels before the altar, eyes closed, fingers gripping a worn wooden cross. His prayers are fierce and passionate, a man torn between duty to his king and loyalty to his faith. Later, you glimpse the king pacing in his chambers, a storm of regret and rage clouding his face. Will no one rid me of this troublesome priest? He is said to have mooted our phrase that set the tragic wheels in motion. You witness the aftermath, the outpouring of grief and pilgrimage to Becket's tomb, where miracles were claimed and the line between politics and sanctity blurred. As you leave Canterbury, the distant toll of bells follows you, a solemn reminder that even the most powerful can fall, but their convictions may echo forever. Asterisk, the solemn bells of Canterbury fade behind you, replaced by the distant hum of a bustling monastery. You find yourself in the vast library of the Abbey of Cluny, in France, early 11th century, where the scent of parchment and wax fills the air. Among the flickering candlelight, you meet Saint Odo of Cluny, a man whose reforming zeal reshaped monastic life across Europe. You watch as Odo moves with quiet authority through the cloisters, inspiring monks to deepen their commitment to prayer and discipline, while fostering a spirit of charity and learning. Mainstream historical fact: Odo was the second abbot of Cluny, and is credited with strengthening the Cluniac reforms, which emphasized strict adherence to the rule of Saint Benedict, and revitalized monasticism throughout medieval Europe. Quirky tidbit: Odo was also known for his keen sense of humor, often using witty stories to teach moral lessons, proving that even monks appreciated a good joke amid their solemn duties. Historians still argue whether the Cluniac movement's wealth and influence ultimately compromised its spiritual ideals, as some monasteries became centers of power, rivaling secular rulers. You follow Odo as he oversees the copying of manuscripts by candlelight, ensuring sacred texts are preserved for future generations. His passion for knowledge is contagious, as he encourages learning alongside prayer. In the refectory, monks gather for meals, their voices blending into a peaceful murmur. Odo's presence fosters unity and a deep sense of purpose. Later, you glimpse Odo writing letters to kings and popes, advocating for church reform and moral renewal. His legacy lives on in the grand cathedrals and monasteries, inspired by Cluny's example, a testament to how one man's vision can echo through stone and scripture as night descends. You stand beneath the abbey's soaring arches, feeling the weight of centuries and the quiet strength of faith renewed. The echo of chants from Cluny's abbey drifts away as you find yourself wandering along the stone streets of Canterbury once more, but this time in the late 13th century. The hustle of pilgrims arriving from across Europe adds a palpable buzz to the air, and you're drawn towards a modest chapel where a young girl sits quietly, her hands folded tightly in prayer. This is Julian of Norwich, an anchoress whose visions would offer comfort and mystery to countless souls through the centuries. Your mainstream historical fact: Julian experienced a series of intense mystical visions during a severe illness around 1373, and later wrote the earliest surviving book in English by a woman, Revelations of Divine Love, exploring themes of God's unconditional love and mercy. The quirky tidbit: Julian is thought to have lived a secluded life, but legend says that she was visited by curious townsfolk and pilgrims who came seeking wisdom and solace, proof that even the most introverted saints had their fan clubs. Historians still argue whether Julian's optimistic theology, famously summarized as "all shall be well," was truly revolutionary, or simply a comforting pastoral message shaped by her unique experiences. You sit beside Julian as she reflects on her visions, seeing God as a loving mother, a compassionate creator, and the source of all comfort. Her words carry a soothing rhythm, like a lullaby for the weary. God is nearer to us than our own breath, she whispers, eyes closed, radiating calm. You imagine the weight of solitude she bore, living behind a locked door, dependent on the charity of neighbors, yet profoundly connected to the divine. Her life invites you to reconsider suffering, hope, and the quiet strength found in faith. As the chapel doors close softly behind you, the lingering warmth of Julian's peace settles in your heart. Like a gentle fire burning through the dark. The calm of Julian's chapel fades as you step into the brisk air of a medieval French village, early 12th century. You hear the rhythmic pounding of hammer on stone, and follow it to the towering figure of Bernard of Clairvaux, a man whose voice and writings stirred both kings and peasants alike. Bernard stands beneath the rising walls of his new abbey, fervently directing monks and craftsmen alike. His passion for reform and devotion to the Virgin Mary shined from his determined eyes. Your mainstream historical fact: Bernard was a key figure in the Cistercian reform movement, promoting austerity, manual labor, and a return to strict Benedictine monasticism, which reshaped monastic practice across Europe. A quirky tidbit: Bernard is credited with influencing the launch of the Second Crusade, preaching so passionately that thousands took up the cross. Though the Crusade's disastrous outcome has historians debating his legacy, Historians still argue whether Bernard's intense charisma was a force for spiritual renewal or a catalyst for political and religious conflict in medieval Europe. You walk with Bernard through the abbey's simple halls, where the monks chant in unison, their voices echoing off rough stone walls. Bernard's speeches mix fiery zeal with gentle humility, challenging monks to deepen their spiritual lives. At dinner, Bernard's humor surfaces. He jokes about the monks' attempts at fasting. Even the fish know when it's Lent, but we seem to forget. Later, you see him writing letters to popes and kings, his words weaving theology with practical advice, wielding influence that shaped church policy for decades. As night falls, Bernard prays fervently, his voice a low murmur in the quiet abbey, reflecting a soul both zealous and tender. Leaving the abbey, you sense the weight of his legacy, a man who balanced fierce conviction with deep compassion, whose impact still ripples through faith communities today. Asterisk. The soft glow of candlelight dims as you step into a quiet chapel somewhere in medieval Europe, the scent of incense lingering in the air. Here you meet Saint Clare of Assisi, a woman whose gentle strength changed the role of women in religious life forever. You see Clare sitting peacefully in her simple cell, her hands folded in prayer, her face serene yet resolute. Mainstream historical fact: Clare was a close follower of Saint Francis and founded the Order of Poor Ladies, later known as the Poor Clares, a monastic community for women committed to poverty and prayer. Quirky tidbit: Clare once famously repelled an invading army by holding up the Eucharist at the city walls of Assisi, after which the attackers reportedly fled, without a fight. History or legend? No one is quite sure. Historians still debate the extent of Clare's political influence in her time, and how much of her story was shaped by later hagiographers to highlight idealized female holiness. You watch Clare walking barefoot through the monastery garden, her eyes bright with quiet determination. Her faith is fierce but gentle, a beacon in a world that often overlooked women's voices. As you sit with her, she shares stories of sacrifice and joy, teaching that true freedom comes through surrender and love. Her legacy invites you to consider how courage and grace can transform even the humblest lives. As night falls, Clare's soft prayers float through the air, wrapping you in a comforting embrace, a perfect close to your journey through the saints and martyrs of the Middle Ages. Asterisk. The night deepens, and your breathing slows, as the voices and stories of the saints and martyrs begin to fade gently into the quiet. You feel the warmth of candlelight softening, the weight of centuries easing from your mind, leaving a calm that settles deep in your bones. The lives you've walked alongside, filled with passion, sacrifice, and unwavering faith, now rest beside you like old friends, their stories quietly humming a lullaby of hope and resilience. Their courage whispers through the stillness, reminding you that even in the darkest times, a single spark of conviction can illuminate the world. Feel the gentle rhythm of the past folding into the present, as the breath of history and spirit mingles softly around you. Let your thoughts drift on this peaceful current, free from the rush of the day. The road is long, but tonight, rest comes easily, wrapped in the quiet strength of those who came before. Now, as the final embers of the fire glow low and the hush of night deepens, carry this calm with you. Remember the saints, not just as distant figures, but as companions in your own journey, encouraging you to face tomorrow with grace, courage, and a heart open to wonder. Sleep well, knowing you are cradled in a legacy of faith and love that transcends time. Asterisk.